Grendelvoss had always prided himself on being the kind of bureaucrat who could make sense of any statistical anomaly. In his 32 years of service at Galactic Child Welfare Station Omega-3, he'd seen adoption trends shift like cosmic winds. Sometimes the crystalline Veltar preferred aquatic families for their younglings. Other times, the gaseous Nethek would inexplicably gravitate toward silicon-based caregivers. But this was something else entirely. He stared at his holographic display, the numbers glowing with an almost mocking intensity. 89%. 89% of non-human cubs across 23 documented species were choosing human adoptive families over their own kind. Well, he muttered to his empty office, his mandibles clicking in what passed for nervous laughter among his people. That's either the most remarkable coincidence in galactic history, or we've got ourselves a proper mystery. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here were the humans, barely out of their home system for 2 centuries, still arguing about which primitive combustion fuel to use, still convinced that their particular imaginary friends were the only correct imaginary friends, and somehow every other species in the known galaxy was lining up to let these chaotic primates raise their children. His office door chimed, and Grendel's 4 eyes swiveled toward the entrance. The woman who walked in looked exactly like what Central Casting would order if someone asked for skeptical human scientist with trust issues. Dr. Amelia Thorne moved with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy, preferably somewhere with better coffee and fewer inexplicable statistical anomalies. Grendelvoss, I presume? She didn't wait for confirmation before settling into the chair across from his desk. I'm here about your little adoption problem. Ah, Dr. Thorne. Grendel's translator device gave his words a slightly metallic edge that matched his mood perfectly. Though I wouldn't call it a problem so much as, well, actually, yes, it's a problem. A big, inexplicable, career-threatening problem. Emilia raised an eyebrow. Career-threatening? When 89% of non-human cubs consistently choose the same adoptive species, the Galactic Council starts asking uncomfortable questions. Questions like, are the humans bribing children? Or, is this some sort of elaborate cultural invasion? Or, my personal favorite, has Grendelvoss completely lost his competence? And have you lost my competence? Grendel's laugh sounded like grinding gears. Dr. Thorne, I've been tracking interspecies adoption patterns since before the humans figured out faster-than-light travel. I can tell you why aquarian polyps prefer methane-breathing families, or why crystalline younglings thrive with energy-based parents. But this, he gestured at the holographic display, this defies every principle of rational mate, selection, species, compatibility, and basic common sense. Emilia leaned forward, studying the data with the intensity of someone who'd made a career out of unraveling cultural mysteries. Walk me through it. When did this pattern start? About 15 years ago, right around the time the Galactic Adoption Accords were expanded to include humans. At first, we thought it was novelty. You know how younglings can be attracted to shiny new things. But the trend didn't fade. If anything, it accelerated. And it's consistent across species? Terrifyingly so. Grendel manipulated the display, showing adoption statistics by species. The militant Korthak, whose entire culture revolves around discipline and honor? Their cubs choose humans. The hyperlogical synthesians, who make decisions based purely on mathematical optimization? Human families. Even the empathic Lumari, who can literally feel the emotional state of potential parents. They're picking humans over their own kind. Emilia studied the data, her expression growing more puzzled by the minute. What about the humans themselves? Are they actively recruiting these cubs somehow? That's what makes this so bizarre. Grendel pulled up another display. Most human families entering the adoption pool specifically request human children. They're not seeking out alien cubs, quite the opposite. Many of them seem genuinely surprised when a non-human youngster chooses them. Surprised? How surprised are we talking? Last month, a human couple from New Geneva Colony came in hoping to adopt a human infant. They were chosen by a Nethek gasling whose selection process involved floating around the waiting area for 3 hours before settling next to them and refusing to leave. Grendel's mandibles twitched. The humans spent 20 minutes asking if there'd been some mistake. Emilia couldn't help but smirk. And the Nethek? Apparently started humming, something Nethek only do when they're completely content. The adoption counselor said it was the fastest bonding she'd ever witnessed. Okay, that's odd. Emilia sat back, processing. What do we know about the selection process? How do these cubs actually choose? That's where things get really interesting. Grendel switched to a different data set. Most species have rigorous matching protocols, psychological compatibility assessments, cultural alignment scores, resource availability indices. The cubs are supposed to choose based on optimal development potential. And humans score well on these assessments? Grendel's laugh this time was genuinely amused. Dr. Thorne, humans score terribly on almost every traditional metric. Their psychological profiles are inconsistent, their cultural practices are contradictory, and their resource allocation is, let's call it, creative. By every rational measure, they should be the least desirable adoptive species in the galaxy. But the cubs keep choosing them anyway. And here's the part that'll really cook your neurons. When we follow up with these adoptees years later, they're thriving. Not just surviving, mind you. Thriving in ways that exceed their biological species' normal development parameters. Emilia felt that familiar tingle that meant she was onto something big. Define thriving. Higher creativity indices, better problem-solving abilities, increased adaptability to novel situations, enhanced emotional intelligence across species barriers. Grendel's 4 eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. Dr. Thorne, these human-raised adoptees are consistently outperforming their peers in almost every meaningful metric. Almost every metric? They score lower on strict adherence to traditional protocols and species-specific behavioral norms. But frankly, given their performance in every other area, that might not be a bug. It might be a feature. Emilia stood and began pacing, her mind racing. So, we have cubs from advanced civilizations systematically choosing the galactic equivalent of chaotic neutral parents, and somehow this produces superior outcomes. That's a rather colorful way to put it, but yes. And nobody's figured out why? The prevailing theory among the Council is that humans possess some sort of latent psychic influence. Maybe something they picked up during their evolution that other species missed. A few fringe researchers think it's pheromonal, though that doesn't explain why it works across completely different biological systems. Emilia stopped pacing and fixed Grendel with a look that suggested she was about to make his day significantly more complicated. Or maybe the cubs know something we don't. Meaning? Meaning maybe we're asking the wrong question. Instead of wondering why cubs are choosing humans, maybe we should be asking what humans are doing that every other supposedly advanced species isn't. Grendel's mandibles clicked rapidly, the equivalent of nervous laughter. Dr. Thorne, that's a dangerous line of thinking. Are you suggesting that human child-rearing methods are somehow superior to practices refined over millennia by civilizations far older and more advanced than theirs? I'm suggesting, Amelia said, already mentally packing her research gear, that I need to spend some time with these families and find out exactly what happens when humans raise non-human children. Because either we're witnessing the galaxy's most elaborate statistical fluke, or these chaotic primates have accidentally stumbled onto something the rest of us missed. The Council won't be pleased if your investigation suggests that human methods are superior to established practices. Amelia's grin was sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. Grendel, my friend, when has scientific truth ever been about pleasing councils? Besides, if humans really have figured out something the rest of the galaxy hasn't, don't you think we owe it to every species to understand what that is? Grendel looked at his displays again, those impossibly consistent numbers mocking him with their clarity. 89%. The number that had turned his orderly world upside down and launched 1,000 uncomfortable questions. Where will you start? New Geneva Colony. Highest concentration of interspecies adoptions, lowest interference from galactic bureaucracy, and, according to your files, home to some of the most successful human-raised alien adoptees in known space. Amelia headed toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Grendel? When the Council asks for updates, tell them I'm conducting a thorough investigation into human psychological manipulation techniques. Is that what you're doing? Absolutely not. But it'll keep them busy with worst-case scenarios while I figure out what's really going on. The door slid shut behind her, leaving Grendel alone with his impossible statistics and the growing suspicion that his nice, orderly universe was about to become significantly more complicated. He looked at the data one more time, those glowing numbers that had started this whole mess. Somewhere out there, human families were raising alien children with methods that apparently worked better than anything the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had developed. And somewhere out there, Dr. Amelia Thorne was about to find out why. Grendel's mandibles clicked once more, this time with something that might have been anticipation. After 32 years of processing adoption statistics, he was finally going to get some answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. Even if those answers turned everything he thought he knew about child-rearing completely upside down. New Geneva Colony sprawled across the surface of Kepler 442b like someone had thrown a handful of architectural styles into a blender and hit chaos mode. Human settlements always looked like this to Amelia. A delightful mess of conflicting design philosophies that somehow managed to function despite violating every principle of urban planning she'd ever studied. She stepped off the transport shuttle and immediately understood why this place had become ground zero for interspecies adoption. The colony buzzed with the kind of organized pandemonium that humans seem to thrive in. Children of at least 8 different species played together in the central plaza, their games involving rules that appeared to change every few minutes based on shouted negotiations and creative interpretations of fairness. Dr. Thorne, a woman approached with the kind of smile that suggested she was genuinely happy to see a complete stranger. I'm Bree, the family liaison coordinator. Welcome to our beautiful madhouse. Amelia shook the offered hand, noting how Bree's grip was firm but not dominating, a distinctly human approach to first contact. Thank you for accommodating my research request on such short notice. Are you kidding? We've been wondering about this adoption trend ourselves. It's not like we advertised humans, now available for cross-species parenting? But here we are. Bree gestured toward the plaza. Come on, let me introduce you to some families. Fair warning, though, today's a bit chaotic. The Hendersons are dealing with their teenage Aquarian going through what we think might be spawning hormones. The Nakamuras are helping their crystalline adoptee build something that may or may not violate several physics laws. And the O'Briens— She paused. Well, let's just say their Korthak cub has discovered human concepts of creative insubordination. Spawning hormones, physics violations, and creative insubordination, Emilia repeated. And this is considered normal? Oh, honey, this is what we call a quiet Tuesday. Their first stop was a modest dome structure where Dante and Holly were engaged in what appeared to be a diplomatic negotiation with a sulking aquatic teenager. The Aquarian, roughly humanoid but with glistening blue-green skin and gill slits along the neck, sat in a specially designed moisture chair, arms crossed in the universal gesture of adolescent displeasure. Brooke, we've talked about this, Holly was saying with the patient tone of someone who'd had this conversation before. You can't flood the neighbor's garden just because their music is too loud. But the sonic frequencies disrupt my meditation cycles. Brooke's voice carried the liquid quality typical of Aquarian speech. In a proper Aquarian community, such noise pollution would be regulated. Dante, meanwhile, was trying not to laugh. Brooke, buddy, I get it, but here's the thing. Flooding their petunias won't solve the noise problem. It'll just create a different problem, namely, us having to explain to Director Hamish why the agricultural sector looks like an ocean. Your conflict resolution methods are inefficient, Brooke sulked. Maybe, Holly agreed cheerfully, but they're also creative. Come on, let's brainstorm some alternatives. What else could we try? Emilia watched in fascination as the conversation evolved from confrontation to collaboration. In an Aquarian family, this situation would have been resolved through predetermined protocols, probably involving community elders and formal mediation rituals. Instead, the humans were turning it into an improvised problem-solving session. What about a sound-dampening barrier? Brooke suggested after a few minutes of discussion. Now you're thinking, Dante grinned. What materials would work best for that? I could use my water manipulation to create a temporary acoustic buffer, but it would need to be reinforced with— Brooke's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that transcended species barriers. Oh, what if we combined my abilities with the colony's sonic engineers? I could provide the fluid dynamics calculations they need for better sound isolation. Emilia blinked. In the space of 10 minutes, a family conflict had transformed into an engineering collaboration. Excuse me, she interrupted. I'm Dr. Emilia Thorne. I'm studying interspecies adoption patterns. Oh, wonderful, Holly beamed. Brooke, this is the researcher Bree mentioned. Dr. Thorne, meet our daughter Brooke. She's 15, incredibly bright, and going through what we charitably call her flood everything phase. It's a legitimate response to environmental stressors, Brooke protested, but she was smiling now. Absolutely, Dante agreed. Just like your mom's tendency to reorganize the entire kitchen when she's stressed is a legitimate response. Doesn't mean we don't look for better alternatives. Emilia found herself genuinely curious. Brooke, can I ask why you chose a human family over an Aquarian one? The teenager's expression grew thoughtful. The Aquarian families were predictable. They had protocols for everything, structured responses to every situation. It felt like living inside a very comfortable, very boring fishbowl. She gestured toward her adoptive parents. These two? They're completely unpredictable. But they never try to solve my problems for me. They just help me figure out how to solve them myself. Even when those solutions involve potential property damage, Emilia asked. Especially then, Brooke laughed. An Aquarian family would have forbidden the flooding and assigned me meditation exercises to manage my impulses. Holly and Dante helped me understand why flooding doesn't work, then challenged me to find better solutions. There's a difference between being controlled and being guided. Their next stop was the Nakamura household, where they found Kenji and Yuki standing in what used to be their backyard but now resembled the aftermath of a small explosion. Geometric crystal formations jutted from the ground at impossible angles, pulsing with soft rainbow light. "Please tell me this isn't another learning experience," Bree said weakly. "Okay, we won't tell you that," Yuki replied cheerfully. "But in our defense, we didn't know that encouraging Prism to think outside the box would result in them literally thinking outside of three-dimensional space." A young crystalline being emerged from behind one of the formations, their translucent body refracting light in patterns that seemed to bend reality around them. "I did it! I created a stable, four-dimensional crystal matrix." "That's amazing, sweetheart," Kenji said, his voice carrying genuine pride mixed with mild terror. "But maybe next time we could discuss the spatial implications before you start bending the laws of physics in the backyard." Other crystalline families would have forbidden such experimentation, Prism said, their voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. They would have required me to follow established crystalline growth patterns and traditional geometric constraints. "And that's bad because," Emilia prompted, "because traditional constraints produce traditional results," Prism explained patiently. "Kenji and Yuki taught me that rules are starting points for thinking, not ending points. They said the most interesting discoveries happen when you figure out which rules can be safely broken." "Safely being the key word," Yuki added, eyeing the dimensional anomaly currently decorating their lawn. "Though I'll admit our definition of safe has expanded considerably since becoming parents." "Do you regret choosing a human family?" Emilia asked Prism directly. The young crystalline's form shifted into what Emilia recognized as their species' expression of deep consideration. "Dr. Thorne, in a traditional crystalline family, I would have learned perfect harmonic resonance, flawless geometric principles, and optimal light refraction techniques. I would have become a magnificent example of everything a crystalline should be. And instead, I learned that harmonic resonance is more interesting when you introduce deliberate dissonance, that geometric principles become art when you break them creatively, and that optimal light refraction is boring compared to light refraction that shouldn't work, but does anyway." Prism's form brightened. "I learned that becoming what you should be is less important than becoming what you could be." Their final family visit was to the O'Brien household, where they found Colum and Bridget engaged in what appeared to be a strategic planning session with a young Korthak. The reptilian cub, Pip, was roughly the size of a human 10-year-old, but moved with the fluid precision characteristic of their warrior species. "The fortress will fall if we attack the main gate," Pip was saying, manipulating toy soldiers on a tactical display. "But what if we don't attack the fortress at all?" "Go on," Colum encouraged. "What if we convince the fortress to come to us? We could stage a fake retreat, make them think we're weaker than we are, lure their forces out into terrain that favors us instead of them." Bridget nodded approvingly. "Classic misdirection. What gave you that idea?" "You did," Pip said simply. "Yesterday, when I was frustrated about my math homework, you didn't tell me the answer. You asked me what would happen if I approached the problem from a completely different angle. So I started thinking, what if military strategy worked the same way? Emilia noticed something interesting in how the humans responded to their adopted cubs' tactical insights. They weren't impressed by the military sophistication. That was expected from a Caretak. They were delighted by the creative thinking. "Pip," she said, "can I ask you something?" Caretak families are renowned for their strategic training. Why choose humans over your own species for education? The young Caretak's head tilted in consideration. Caretak families would have taught me the established strategies, the proven tactics, the honorable approaches to warfare. I would have learned to be an excellent traditional warrior. And you didn't want that? I wanted to be an excellent warrior, period. Not just traditional. Pip's eyes, surprisingly expressive for a reptilian species, met hers directly. Colum and Bridget don't teach me what to think. They teach me how to think. Then they let me figure out what to do with that skill. Even when what you figure out challenges conventional wisdom. Especially then, Bridget interjected. Some of our best family decisions have come from Pip pointing out that our conventional wisdom was actually just conventional stubbornness. Like what? Amelia asked. Like when they convinced us to let the neighborhood kids use our backyard for their games, even though it meant more noise and mess, Colum explained. We were thinking about property values and peaceful evenings. Pip pointed out we were thinking about short-term convenience instead of long-term community building. And they were right, Bridget added. Now we have better relationships with our neighbors. The kids have a safe place to play. And our evenings are actually more peaceful because everyone looks out for each other. Emilia felt pieces of a puzzle starting to align in her mind, though the complete picture remained frustratingly out of reach. Pip, do you think other species could learn these thinking methods? I think other species choose not to, Pip said, with the blunt honesty that made Caretak such effective negotiators. They have systems that work, so they stick with them. Humans have systems that work, but they're always trying to make them work better. There's a difference between solving problems and preventing better solutions. As they walked back toward the colony center, Emilia's mind churned with observations that didn't quite fit the patterns she'd expected to find. The human families weren't using advanced psychological techniques or sophisticated cultural integration protocols. They were just being themselves. Chaotic, inconsistent, emotionally driven, and somehow producing results that exceeded every predictive model. Bree, she said finally, I need to see more families, and I need to talk to some of the adult adoptees, the ones who've been raised by humans and are now making their way in the galaxy. That can be arranged, though I should warn you, their perspectives might challenge some of your assumptions about how child development is supposed to work. Emilia laughed, the sound carrying a note of excitement that she hadn't felt since beginning this investigation. At this point, I'm hoping they will. Because if I'm right about what I'm starting to see here, every assumption about optimal child rearing in the galaxy might need to be completely reconsidered. The sun was setting over New Geneva Colony, painting the chaotic skyline in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in those mismatched buildings, human families were raising alien children, using methods that made no sense according to established theory, but somehow produced extraordinary results. Tomorrow, Emilia would begin the real investigation. Tonight, she had just enough time to wonder if the galaxy's most primitive species had accidentally discovered something that all the advanced civilizations had missed. And if they had, well, that would change everything. Emilia's third day in New Geneva Colony started with what the humans cheerfully called routine chaos, the kind of morning where nothing went according to plan, but somehow everything still worked out. She was beginning to suspect that this wasn't coincidence. She'd arranged to shadow several families during their daily routines, hoping to identify the specific mechanisms behind human child-rearing success. What she found instead was a masterclass in controlled unpredictability that would have given traditional child development specialists nervous breakdowns. At the Nakamura household, breakfast had become an impromptu physics lesson when Prism's latest experiment caused their juice to hover 3 inches above the table. "Well," Yuki said, stirring her coffee while watching the floating liquid with remarkable calm, "I guess today we're learning about localized gravitational fields." "Is this normal?" Amelia asked. "Define normal," Kenji replied, attempting to retrieve the floating juice with a pair of tongs. "Yesterday, Prism accidentally turned our garden shed into a 4-dimensional maze. The day before that, they figured out how to make music by harmonizing with the microwave. Normal is a moving target around here. Shouldn't you be concerned about safety protocols?" "Oh, we are," Yuki assured her. "But there's a difference between reasonable caution and suffocating paranoia. Prism needs room to experiment, even if that means breakfast occasionally defies gravity." Other crystalline families would have established strict boundaries around dimensional manipulation, Prism observed, successfully redirecting the juice into their glass through what appeared to be localized space-time curvature. They would have prioritized safety over exploration. "And you prefer exploration?" "I prefer the option to choose," Prism said simply. "Yuki and Kenji taught me to assess risks myself rather than accepting someone else's assessment. Sometimes I choose safety, sometimes I choose exploration, but it's my choice based on my understanding, not their fear." Amelia was jotting notes when her communication device chirped with an emergency alert. "Colony-wide evacuation warning. Asteroid mining accident. Potential impact with the settlement. All residents to emergency stations immediately." The chaos that followed should have been terrifying. Instead, Amelia found herself witnessing something remarkable. Within minutes, the Nakamura household had transformed into a coordination center. Kenji was pulling up structural integrity reports while Yuki contacted neighbors to coordinate evacuation routes. But what struck Amelia was how they immediately included Prism in the decision-making process. The evacuation shelters are designed for standard atmospheric pressure, Prism observed, studying the emergency protocols. But 3 families in Sector 5 have methane-breathing adoptees. The shelters won't accommodate their respiratory needs. "Good catch," Kenji said, his voice tight with stress but still respectful. "What do you think we should do about that?" "I could create temporary atmospheric pockets using crystalline matrix barriers," Prism suggested, "but I'd need help calculating the exact molecular configurations." "Can you do it safely?" Yuki asked. "With supervision and the right equipment?" "Yes." "Then let's make it happen." Amelia watched in amazement as the family shifted into crisis mode, without panic, without excluding their child from the process, and without abandoning their core approach to problem-solving. Other species would have prioritized adult decision-making and child protection. The humans were treating their adoptee as a valuable team member whose unique abilities could contribute to everyone's safety. They made their way to the Emergency Coordination Center, where Director Hamish was managing the colony's response with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested this wasn't his first crisis. The center buzzed with activity as human families arrived with their diverse broods of adopted children. "Status report," Hamish called out. "Mining platform's trajectory puts impact in 36 minutes, reported one of the technicians. "Standard evacuation procedures are in effect, but we've got complications." "Define complications." 18 families with non-standard atmospheric requirements, 12 with mobility challenges based on species physiology, and 6 with cubs too young for standard evacuation protocols. Emilia watched Hamish's expression shift from professional concern to something that looked almost like anticipation. Right. Standard protocols clearly aren't going to cut it. Time for creative solutions. All families with special needs, step forward. Let's figure this out together. What happened next defied every emergency management principle Emilia had ever studied. Instead of implementing predetermined procedures, the humans began an impromptu, collaborative problem-solving session that included input from children, adults, and adoptees of every species present. Brooke, the sulking teenager from earlier, was suddenly calculating fluid dynamics for underwater evacuation pods. Pip was working with adult Caretakers to develop tactical movement patterns for families with mobility challenges. Prism was creating atmospheric barriers for methane breathers while explaining the physics to human engineers, who frantically took notes. "This is insane," Emilia muttered to Bree. "Emergency protocols exist for a reason. You can't just improvise disaster response." "Can't we?" Bree asked mildly. "Because, from where I'm standing, we're solving problems faster than any predetermined protocol could have managed." "But what about safety? What about proven procedures? What about trusting people to rise to the occasion?" Bree interrupted gently. "Look around, Doctor. Thorne, do you see panic? Do you see chaos? Or do you see a community working together to protect everyone?" Emilia looked, really looked, and what she saw changed everything. She saw human parents treating their children, biological and adopted alike, as competent individuals capable of contributing meaningful solutions. She saw alien cubs who'd been raised to think independently, offering insights that adult experts had missed. She saw families that functioned as collaborative teams rather than hierarchical structures. "The asteroid's been deflected," came the announcement 20 minutes later. Mining crews managed to alter its trajectory, using a combination of standard deflection protocols and some rather innovative applications of localized gravitational manipulation. "Prism's work?" Kenji asked with obvious pride. "Among others. Turns out when you combine traditional human engineering with crystalline dimensional mathematics and Aquarian fluid dynamics, you get solutions nobody thought to try before." As the all-clear sounded and families began dispersing, Emilia found herself in conversation with Zen, an adult Caretakers who'd been raised by humans and now worked as a deep space explorer. "I heard you're investigating why cubs choose human families," Zen said, their reptilian features arranged in what she'd learned to recognize as amusement. "Find any answers yet?" "I'm starting to form a hypothesis," Emilia admitted, "but it's uncomfortable." "Because it suggests that human methods might be superior to established practices?" "Because it suggests that what we've been calling advanced civilization might actually be comfortable stagnation." Emilia gestured toward the families around them. "Look at how they handled that crisis. No rigid protocols, no adult-only decision-making, no exclusion of children from the problem-solving process. They treated it as a community challenge and leveraged every available resource, including the insights of their adopted cubs." "And," Zen prompted, "and it worked better than standard emergency procedures would have. Faster, more creative, more inclusive, and with better outcomes for everyone involved." Emilia shook her head. "Zen, I think I know why cubs choose human families." "Oh? They're not choosing adoptive parents. They're choosing survival instructors." Emilia's voice grew more excited as the pieces fell into place. "Human families don't raise children to fit into existing systems. They raise them to build better systems. They don't optimize for safety and conformity. They optimize for adaptability and innovation. Zen's laugh was rich with understanding. Now you're getting it. Want to know the really interesting part? There's more? Dr. Thorne, I've traveled to more worlds than most species even know exist. I have seen civilizations that have remained unchanged for millennia. Cultures so perfectly stable that they've stopped growing entirely. And you know what I've never found on any of those worlds? What? Problems they couldn't solve. Zen's eyes gleamed with something that might have been mischief. Every species I've encountered has reached a comfortable equilibrium where they've mastered their challenges. Except humans. Humans are still arguing about everything, still trying to improve everything, still convinced that whatever they're doing could probably be done better. That sounds exhausting. It is. It's also why human-raised adoptees become explorers, innovators, and pioneers instead of comfortable specialists. Zen gestured toward the colony around them. We don't choose human families because they're perfect, Dr. Thorne. We choose them because they're perfectly imperfect, and they teach us that imperfection is where growth happens. Emilia spent that evening in her temporary quarters, reviewing her notes and trying to wrap her mind around what she'd observed. The humans weren't using superior technology or advanced psychological techniques. They were using something far more radical. They were treating children as competent individuals capable of learning to make good decisions, rather than incompetent individuals who needed to be protected from making bad ones. The difference was subtle but profound. Instead of providing solutions, humans taught problem-solving. Instead of eliminating risks, they taught risk assessment. Instead of creating perfect environments, they taught adaptation to imperfect ones. It was, she realized, exactly the opposite of what every other species considered optimal child-rearing. And somehow, impossibly, it was working better than anything else in the galaxy. Tomorrow, she would need to interview more adult adoptees, gather more data, and begin formulating her report for the Galactic Council. But tonight, as she watched human families through her window, still solving problems, still arguing about the best approaches, still refusing to accept that good enough was actually good enough, she wondered if she was witnessing the most significant discovery in galactic anthropology. The humans hadn't stumbled onto a superior parenting technique. They had stumbled onto something much more important. A way of raising children that optimized for an uncertain future rather than a predictable present. And apparently, cubs from across the galaxy had figured that out long before the experts had. 3 weeks later, Amelia stood before the Galactic Council's emergency session, her presentation hologram displaying the most uncomfortable truth in recorded interspecies history. The assembled delegates, representatives of 26 advanced civilizations, stared at her findings with the collective expression of beings who'd just been told their entire understanding of child development was fundamentally wrong. Let me ensure I understand your conclusions correctly, Doctor. Thorne, said Counselor Viridian of the Synthesians, their crystalline voice carrying the kind of precision that made even computers feel inadequate. You're suggesting that human child-rearing methods are superior to practices our civilizations have refined over millennia? I'm suggesting, Emilia replied, with the confidence of someone who'd spent 3 weeks having her worldview systematically demolished, that human child-rearing methods produce superior results. Whether that makes them superior depends on what you're optimizing for. Explain. Emilia activated her first data display. Every advanced civilization in this room has optimized their child-rearing practices for the same goal: producing adults who excel within existing systems. You create specialists who fit perfectly into predetermined roles, who follow established protocols, who maintain cultural stability. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. This was, after all, the foundation of civilized society. Humans, Amelia continued, accidentally optimized for something completely different. They optimized for producing adults who can create new systems when existing ones fail. The murmurs stopped. The evidence is overwhelming. Human-raised adoptees show consistently higher adaptability indices, creative problem-solving abilities, and innovation metrics compared to their species-raised counterparts. But more importantly, they show something else, something none of our assessments traditionally measure. Which is, prompted Counselor Thex, the Caretak representative, anti-fragility, the ability to not just survive disruption, but to become stronger because of it. Amelia's next display showed comparative stress response data. When faced with novel challenges, traditionally raised individuals apply existing solutions. When those solutions fail, they escalate to authority figures. When authority figures can't help, they experience system breakdown. And human-raised individuals? They get creative, they improvise, they fail forward. Amelia's voice carried a note of wonder that she couldn't quite suppress. They've been trained from childhood to view failure as information rather than defeat, to see problems as opportunities rather than obstacles, and to treat uncertainty as a playground rather than a threat. Counselor Viridian's form flickered with agitation. Dr. Thorne, you're describing a fundamentally unstable approach to development. How can children thrive without clear guidelines and established procedures? That's exactly the wrong question, Amelia said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the chamber's growing unease. The right question is, how can children thrive in a universe that refuses to follow clear guidelines and established procedures? She activated her most damning piece of evidence, a comparison study of adult adoptees now working in various galactic professions. Zen, the Caretak explorer I interviewed, has successfully mapped more unknown star systems than any traditional Caretak scout in history. Not because human families taught them better navigation techniques, but because they taught them to improvise when their instruments failed, to find opportunity in unexpected discoveries, and to treat the unknown as fascinating rather than threatening. Coral, an Aquarian adoptee now working in terraforming, has developed water management systems that exceed Aquarian engineering standards by 30%. Not because humans understand water better than Aquarians, but because they taught Coral to question why existing systems couldn't be improved. Brooke, still a teenager, solved the sonic pollution problem in Sector 5 by creating a community sound-sharing protocol that turned noise into collaborative music. No Aquarian family would have encouraged such disruption of acoustic harmony. The chamber fell silent as delegates processed the implications. "You're suggesting," said Counselor Naimara of the Empathic Collective, "that our pursuit of optimal development has actually limited our children's potential?" "I'm suggesting that your pursuit of predictable outcomes has eliminated your children's ability to handle unpredictable realities." Amelia gestured toward her data. "Every species in this chamber has achieved remarkable stability. Your societies function beautifully. Your children develop according to precise parameters. Your cultures maintain consistency across generations." That sounds positive. It would be if the universe were stable, but it's not. Amelia's next display showed galactic disruption patterns over the past millennium. Climate shifts, resource depletion, first contact scenarios, technological breakthroughs, cosmic anomalies. The universe keeps changing in ways that make stable systems vulnerable. And humans. Humans never achieved stability. They're still arguing about basic questions other species settled eons ago. They still treat every generation as an experiment in how to do things better. They still raise their children as if the future will be fundamentally different from the present. Emilia paused for effect, which, as it turns out, is probably the most accurate assumption any species has made. Counselor Thex leaned forward. You're saying the cubs choose human families because they instinctively recognize superior adaptive training? I'm saying the cubs choose human families because they're young enough to prioritize growth over comfort, change over stability, potential over safety. Emilia's final display showed the selection data from a completely new angle. Look at the ages. The pattern is strongest among the youngest cubs and weakens as adoptees approach adulthood. The window for this selection preference correlates exactly with the developmental period when neural plasticity is highest. They're choosing based on developmental instinct. They're choosing based on survival instinct. They sense at some level that the future will require skills their own species aren't teaching. The silence stretched until Counselor Viridian spoke again. What are the implications of your findings, Doctor? Thorne? Emilia had been dreading this question for days. The implications are that every advanced species in the galaxy has accidentally created a developmental dead end. You've optimized for current conditions so effectively that you've eliminated your children's ability to adapt to changing conditions. And humans. Humans are accidentally running the galaxy's most effective leadership development program. They're not trying to create perfect Corthac, or ideal Aquarians, or optimal crystallines. They're creating individuals who can succeed, regardless of what the universe throws at them. The chamber erupted in concerned chatter until Counselor Nymara called for order. Dr. Thorne, are you recommending that we abandon our established child-rearing practices in favor of human methods? I'm recommending that you consider what happens when your established practices encounter situations they weren't designed to handle. Emilia's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen the future and wasn't entirely comfortable with it. Because, based on current trends, within 50 years, leadership positions throughout the galaxy will be disproportionately filled by human-raised adoptees. Not because humans are planning some sort of cultural takeover, but because they're accidentally producing the only individuals capable of handling an increasingly unpredictable universe. As delegates began filing out, presumably to have very uncomfortable conversations with their respective species' child development experts, Emilia gathered her materials with the satisfaction of someone who'd solved an impossible puzzle, and the unease of someone who didn't particularly like the solution. Grendel approached as the chamber emptied. Well, Doctor Thorne, I believe you've successfully answered our question about adoption patterns. And created about 1,000 new questions in the process, Emilia replied. Grendel, what happens when every species realizes that the galaxy's most primitive civilization is accidentally producing their future leaders? I suspect, Grendel said, with what passed for a smile among his people, that things are about to become very interesting. 6 months later, Emilia received a message from New Geneva Colony. The Galactic Council had quietly begun funding alternative development programs based on human methodologies. Several species had started pilot programs incorporating controlled uncertainty and collaborative problem-solving into their child-rearing practices. The results, according to early reports, were promising and terrifying. Because it turned out that when you taught children to question everything, improve anything, and treat the impossible as merely improbable, they had a tendency to exceed every expectation you thought to set for them. Emilia looked out her office window at the stars, wondering what the galaxy would look like in a generation or two when every species was raising children the human way. It would probably be chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely exhausting. It would also probably be magnificent. Somewhere out there, human families were still arguing about the best way to raise children while accidentally raising the individuals who would reshape the galaxy. They didn't know they were running the most successful leadership development program in known space. They probably wouldn't believe it if you told them. Which, Emilia reflected with something approaching fondness, was probably exactly why it worked.